So this is Keir Starmer, the Shadow Secretary of State for exiting the European Union, who is here today to persuade us that Labour is the best party to represent the national interest in the forthcoming negotiations with the EU. Let's see what he's got to say for himself.
We don't believe that if you're a citizen of the world, you're a citizen of nowhere.
Good, because that would be a ridiculous thing to believe. World citizenship is not a real thing that you can have. I'm glad that you don't believe that, Keir.
Of course we recognise and accept that immigration rules are going to have to change when we leave the EU.
I'm sorry, mate, what was that?
Let me say that again. We accept that immigration rules are going to have to change when we leave the EU.
Good. And of course they must change. That's what we voted for in the referendum last year. The question is specifically how they're going to change it, by how much. Anyway, I think we can agree in principle, so carry on.
But we don't accept that immigration should be the only overarching priority, the only red line.
Good, and nor should you.
Nor do we believe that leaving the EU means that we have to sever all of our ties with Europe.
Good. I don't think anybody's seriously advocating that it should mean those things. I mean, is anybody seriously talking about filling in the Channel Tunnel or something like that? No, I'm glad that you don't accept that.
That Brexit means weakening workers' rights, environmental protections, or that it must entail slashing corporate taxes.
Good, because Brexit doesn't necessarily mean any of those things at all. What Brexit should mean, I believe, is that the authority, that the mandate, that the power to make decisions about those types of issues rest with the British Parliament and the representatives who've been elected by the British people to make those decisions.
We have a very different vision. A vision about how Brexit can work for Britain and the EU. And at its heart, is a belief that we need to build a close, collaborative future relationship with the EU. A changed relationship, but a relationship. And a collaborative future relationship. Not members, of course.
No, of course not. Because there was a referendum last year where we voted to not be members anymore. And for an elected representative to try and frustrate that outcome, to take it back, to have some version of Brexit where nothing really changes, but you just call it something else, would be really disingenuous and dishonest, and a betrayal of your role as an elected leader of your people. I'm glad.
But genuine partners going forward.
Absolutely. What Brexit should mean is a real partnership where both parties negotiate for their best interests for future relations. I'm glad, and your role, of course, in this is to get the best outcome for the British people, to represent our interest.
Where jobs, the economy, and retaining the benefits of the single market and customs union are the priority.
And as long as those things don't come with retaining membership of the EU, then I think everybody's in favour of retaining the benefits. Although the Europeans have explicitly ruled that out, I don't quite know how you're going to go about it, but I could agree in principle that would be a good thing.
Where hard-fought workplace rights and environmental protections are protected.
I presume by the British Parliament rather than the EU.
Where we are truly an open, outward-looking country.
Rather than the bunch of racist Nazis or something.
And where EU nationals living here are guaranteed their rights and can live in certainty that Brexit will not affect them.
Well, I don't see how you're going to do that. Surely Brexit is going to affect everybody who lives here to some extent. And in fact, it seems to me that by isolating EU citizens in this process is well that would be dividing the country, wouldn't it, into along British and EU lines, and you wouldn't want that, would you?
A Brexit that brings the country together,
Oh, good.
that radically devolves power and supports all regions and nations of the UK.
All right, Keir, you've completely lost me now, mate. I've got no idea what that means.
And that's the approach to Brexit that I want to set out briefly this morning.
Good.
But let me deal with this head on and summarise the key differences. The Prime Minister has adopted an ideologically approached view of Brexit. And where has it led her?
To a historic lead in the opinion polls. To what is very likely to be a devastating victory over your party in the forthcoming general election, unless you can really pull the rabbit out of the hat with your remaining arguments. That's where it's led her.
It's led her down a slippery slope. Nothing to do with the single market. Nothing to do with the customs union. Nothing to do with the European Court or any court.
Other than the British courts, of course, Keir.
Nothing to do with the very many agencies that do such fantastic collaborative work that's so important to all of us. Out of all of those.
Yes, out of all of those things which we voted on implicitly in the in-out referendum last year, and which we're about to vote on again explicitly in the general election in a couple of weeks. Those things she's laid out her policies, and those things, those ideas, those objectives are really the basis for her current popularity.
An approach that's led her to that place.
Which again is a fantastic place for her.
And what does that mean? That means taking option after option off the table at the beginning of the negotiations.
Yes, specifically the options that the majority of people in this country don't want to see as outcomes in the negotiation. The bad options are the ones that have been taken off the table.
Talking up no deal as if that's acceptable.
Which of course it is. No deal would be acceptable in the circumstance that the alternative is worse. And this is just simple common sense, Keir.
Some people say, well, that's a clear approach.
Because it really is.
It's a rigid approach. It is removing options before we've started. And it's a reckless approach.
Yes, if we're not careful, we might end up out of the European Union, wouldn't we, mate?
What Labour will do is to scrap the Brexit white paper and draw up new negotiating objectives. We will, on day one, unilaterally guarantee the rights of EU citizens in this country.
Why on earth would you do that? Not that I've got anything against protecting the rights of EU citizens, it's just that we all want the EU to reciprocate with our citizens who are living overseas. Because you have to remember, Keir, that in this election it is the British people who are voting for you to represent their interests, rather than guaranteeing the rights of the EU citizens, who will be represented by their own team of negotiators in this. By unilaterally handing or unilaterally guaranteeing these rights, you are simply handing the opportunity for the other party in this negotiation to leverage the rights of our citizens living in their territory to achieve objectives that are beneficial to them in these negotiations. And that would be a very great disservice to all Britons and the people who you are asking to vote for you today, especially those living overseas in Europe. This is a moronic plan for you to have.
And work.
good shit round of applause I think from his own party. That'll be the 5 EU citizens who've turned out to see him today, giving him clapping away there.
And of course fight for the rights of UK citizens across Europe.
Oh, great! Oh, so you would actually put a good word in for our guys after all. That's really good of you, mate.
We will scrap the Great Repeal Bill and replace it with what it should be, an EU Rights and Protections Bill.
Well, I'm no legal expert there, mate, and I don't really know exactly what would be in that piece of legislation, but if it's anything like it sounds, the protecting the EU rights, it just sounds like it would really favour the Europeans and would prevent any significant constitutional or legal change at all. Perhaps I'm being a bit cynical, a bit presumptuous about what the contents of that piece of legislation are, but just the title really does seem to suggest that it would be about protecting the rights of the EU rather than the rights of Britain, who of course you would be representing, albeit really badly.
We will give a proper role to Parliament in the process, not sideline it.
What, by tearing up the legislation that was passed by that very same Parliament?
Treat all challenge as frustration or dissent. And we will, of course, rebuild Britain by investing in people.
Great.
In a future that is fairer for all.
Well, let's be honest, mainly for the Europeans. Right, Keir? Good luck with that, mate.